That Christmas night, the table sparkled with lights, laughter, and the smell of roasted turkey. My relatives were busy bragging about promotions, cars, and vacations. I sat quietly, listening until someone asked, "So what about you? Still struggling with odd jobs?" I took a deep breath, smiled, and said softly, "Actually, I own 21 coffee shops now." For a moment, silence, then laughter. My uncle nearly spilled his wine. My aunt shook her head. My younger brother smirked. "Stop making things up, you, a business owner?" I clenched my fist under the table, but only whispered, "You'll see." The living room glowed with warm golden light. Strings of fairy bulbs framed the windows, and the Christmas tree shimmered with ornaments we had collected over the years. My father had insisted on hosting the dinner at the family house again, the same house where I had grown up. I hadn't stepped foot here in years. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon filled the air, wrapping the space in a comfort that felt strangely foreign to me now. My aunts and uncles filled the room with laughter, their glasses clinking, voices rising over the carols humming in the background. The table groaned under the weight of roasted chicken, ham glazed with honey, bowls of steaming potatoes, and the famous gingerbread cookies my mother used to bake every December. For a moment, I almost felt like a child again, sneaking a cookie before dinner and hoping no one noticed. I sat near the end of the table, quietly carving slices of ham, listening to everyone share their accomplishments from the past year. My cousin bragged about buying his second car, my aunt boasted about her new vacation home, and my younger brother Daniel grinned while talking about his promotion at the family business. Every sentence felt like a reminder that I was still the failure in their eyes, the one who had walked away years ago with nothing but a suitcase and a stubborn dream. Then it happened. My father, with his usual sternness, turned his gaze toward me. "And you?" he asked, swirling the wine in his glass. "What about you? Still serving coffee to strangers for spare change?" The table chuckled. A sting burned in my chest, but I kept my voice calm. "Actually," I said, meeting his eyes, "this year I opened 21 coffee shops across 3 cities." For a moment, silence blanketed the room. Forks froze midair. Even the Christmas music in the background seemed to dim. Then came the laughter, loud, mocking, almost rehearsed. My uncle slapped the table so hard the glasses rattled. 21 coffee shops? What's next? You'll tell us you own Starbucks?" My cousin nearly choked on his wine, laughing. Daniel leaned back in his chair with that same smug grin he wore when we were kids. "Come on, Dad. He's probably working as a barista and thinks he's some big CEO now. Don't embarrass yourself, brother. We all know the truth." I felt the heat rise to my face, but I refused to flinch. I had spent too many years letting their words break me. Not tonight. I straightened my back, placed my fork down gently, and smiled. Inside, though, memories of sleeping on park benches, of washing dishes until my fingers bled, of counting every coin to buy a bag of coffee beans. Everything came rushing back. I had built everything from the ground up, brick by brick, bean by bean, without a single ounce of their support. I let them laugh, let them roll their eyes and shake their heads. My silence made them laugh harder, as if I had just confirmed their doubts. My father smirked, proud of himself for putting me down once again. I reached into the inside pocket of my blazer, fingers brushing against the thick envelope I had been carrying all night. I had thought maybe tonight would be the right time, but as their voices turned sharper, as Daniel leaned in and whispered something to our cousin while pointing at me. I realized the truth. They weren't ready to celebrate me. They never would be. I wrapped my fingers tighter around the envelope but didn't pull it out. Not yet. The timing wasn't right. Instead, I lifted my glass slowly and said in the calmest voice I could muster, "You'll see." The laughter around the table faltered for a second. My father frowned, searching my face for a sign of weakness. Daniel rolled his eyes again, but I caught the flicker of uncertainty in his pupils. I smiled wider, almost to myself, and took a sip of wine. Micro cliffhanger. Deep inside, I already knew this wasn't the end of the conversation. The envelope in my pocket felt heavier than ever, as if it were waiting for its moment to change everything. The sound of my father's laughter still rang in my ears long after the dinner plates had been cleared away. I lay awake that night in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, the string lights outside flickering against the frosted window. Their mocking voices kept replaying in my head. "Stop making things up. You, a business owner? Don't embarrass yourself." For a moment, I let the words sink in, like old wounds splitting open again. I had hoped, stupidly, that this Christmas would be different. That maybe, after all the years away, after all the silent nights I'd spent working instead of sleeping, my family would finally look at me with pride. Instead, I was the butt of their jokes, the same useless dreamer they had always said I was. I closed my eyes and suddenly I was 12 again, sitting on the back steps of this very house, clutching my sketchbook full of cafe designs. I remembered running to show my father, my eyes shining with excitement. "Dad, look! Someday I'll have my own coffee shop. People will line up outside." He didn't even glance at the page. He just grunted, took a sip of beer, and muttered, "Coffee doesn't pay the bills. You should be more like your brother." His words were heavy, but heavier still was the way he looked at Daniel, proud, indulgent, as though he had already chosen his favorite son. That night, after another argument, he shouted at me to leave if I wanted to keep chasing stupid fantasies. I packed a single duffel bag. No one stopped me, not even my mother, though she cried quietly in the corner. I told myself I'd prove them wrong, even if it meant starting from nothing. Nothing. That was exactly what I had. No money, no connections. I washed dishes in a greasy diner for months, my hands raw from detergent. I delivered newspapers at dawn. I took any job that paid me, just enough to save a few bills at the end of the week. Every night, when the city finally slept, I'd sit in the corner of a run-down coffee shop, scribbling recipes, sketching cafe layouts, and listening to customers' conversations. I studied everything, how they ordered, how they lingered, what made them smile when they took a sip. It was there that I met people who saw me differently, not as a failure, not as the other son. There was Mrs. Liu, the baker who let me taste her pastries and taught me how the smallest details, the temperature of the oven, the way you fold the dough, could change everything. There was Marcus, an old barista with shaky hands but endless patience, who showed me how to pull the perfect shot of espresso. And there was Clara, a fellow dreamer who told me, "You're not crazy. You just see something they can't." With their help, I opened my first cafe in a tiny corner of the city. It wasn't glamorous, second-hand chairs, mismatched mugs, and a coffee machine older than me, but it was mine. I worked until dawn, slept on a cot in the storage room, and poured every ounce of my soul into every cup I served. Slowly, people noticed. They came back not just for the coffee, but for the warmth, the stories, the sense of belonging. That first shop grew into 3, then 7, then 21. Each one carried a piece of me, of my journey, of the lessons I had carved out of rejection and hunger. And yet, in that dining room, surrounded by the people whose approval I once craved, all they could do was laugh. I sat up in bed, unable to sleep, and reached for the wooden box tucked under my suitcase. My fingers brushed against it, and I felt the familiar roughness of its carved edges. Inside lay something I hadn't dared to show anyone in years. My mother's old leather-bound diary. She had given it to me the night I left, pressing it into my hands with trembling fingers. I opened it slowly, the yellowed pages whispering like dry leaves. Her handwriting leapt out at me, curved, neat, full of warmth. My chest tightened as I read the first lines. To my eldest, if you ever feel alone, remember. I stopped. My breath caught. Micro cliffhanger. There, in the fading ink of her words, I noticed a sentence underlined twice. A sentence I had never dared to read out loud before. A week passed since that dinner, but the taste of their laughter still clung to me more bitterly than any overbrewed espresso. I buried myself in work, arriving at my flagship cafe before dawn and leaving long after the last customer had gone. The smell of roasted beans, the hiss of steaming milk, the quiet hum of conversation. These were the sounds and scents that had kept me alive when my own family had cast me aside. On the 7th evening, as I sat in my apartment reviewing the quarterly numbers, the doorbell rang. The sound was sharp, insistent, echoing through the polished floors and high ceilings of the life I had built. For a moment, I thought it was one of my managers, perhaps bringing some urgent report. But when I opened the door, I froze. There they were, my father and Daniel, my father in his old brown coat, shoulders squared as though he owned the place. Daniel, younger, sharper, dressed in a tailored suit that screamed money he hadn't earned. My chest tightened. Surprised, my father said, brushing past me before I even invited him in. Daniel followed, his cologne filling the air, his eyes darting across the apartment like a thief casing a house. I forced a smile, swallowing the knot in my throat. I didn't expect to see you so soon. What brings you here? For a brief, fragile moment, I wondered if they had come to apologize. Maybe they had talked it over and realized how cruel they'd been. Maybe they wanted to mend things, to say they were proud. My heart wanted to believe it. But then, as my father set his hat on the table, I saw it, the calculating gleam in his eyes. He looked around at the polished marble counters, the view of the city skyline, the neatly stacked documents on my desk. He smirked. So, he said slowly, dragging out the word, "Turns out you weren't lying. You really did open those cafes." Daniel chuckled, running his fingers along the leather of my chair. "Nice place you've got here, bro. Didn't think serving lattes could buy all this." I remained standing, watching them circle the room like vultures. Then my father dropped the act. Yeah, his voice hardened, his eyes narrowed. "Listen, son, let's not pretend you did this all on your own. Who fed you? Who clothed you? Who gave you the start in life? That was me. Without me, you'd have nothing. So now that you're rich, it's time to pay us back. A fair share. A few of those coffee shops should belong to your family. It's only right." My jaw clenched. For years, I had dreamed of this moment. Not that they would demand a piece of me, but that they would finally recognize I wasn't the failure they painted me to be. And here they were, not with love, not with pride, but with open palms, asking for something they never built. Daniel leaned forward, smirking like a schoolyard bully who finally caught his prey. You don't want to make this ugly, do you? We can go to everyone, uncles, aunts, the whole town. We'll tell them you stole, that you cheated, that you're just a fraud, unless you cut us in. Say, 5 shops each. That's nothing to you now, right? His words sliced through the air like knives. My father nodded, adding fuel to the fire. You owe me. Remember the roof over your head? The food you ate? You'll give us our due, or we'll ruin that little empire of yours. Inside, I felt the old anger rise, hot and heavy. But anger was what they expected. They wanted me to explode, to prove their point that I was reckless and ungrateful. Instead, I took a long breath, forcing my pulse to slow. Years of therapy, years of late nights building discipline, years of promising myself I'd never let them control me again. This was the test. I set down my pen gently. So that's why you came, I said, my tone calm, almost detached. Not to see me, not to apologize, just to take what isn't yours. Daniel smirked wider, misreading my composure as weakness. Finally, you're catching on. So, which cafes are mine? For a second, I let them believe I was cornered. Then I stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, like the creak of an old door. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't curse. I simply walked to my bedroom, the echo of my footsteps filling the silence. When I returned, I was holding a wooden box. It was old, the corners worn smooth, the lid scratched from years of being opened and closed. My mother's box. I set it down on the table between us. The sound of wood hitting glassware made them flinch. I looked at both of them, my smile calm, but my eyes unblinking. If you think everything I have is thanks to you, I said, tapping the lid softly, then you'll want to see what's inside. For the first time all evening, no one laughed. Micro cliffhanger. My father reached forward, hands trembling slightly, and began to lift the lid of the box. His confident smirk flickered, and for a brief second, I thought I saw fear flash across his face. I slid the wooden box across the polished dining table. The scraping sound against the glass surface made everyone pause. My father's hand hovered above it, his thick fingers twitching with a mixture of greed and unease. Daniel leaned forward, his smile faltering for the first time. Open it, I said softly. He lifted the lid. Inside lay a stack of documents, neatly organized, sealed in transparent sleeves. Titles, contracts, ownership papers, all signed, all stamped, all bearing one name, mine. The name he had once said would never mean anything. For a moment, my father stared as though the letters had been written in a language he couldn't read. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Finally, he croaked, This must be a trick. You put your name there for show. Those shops can't really be yours." Daniel snatched a document and skimmed it. His face drained of color. He tried to laugh, but the sound cracked halfway. "Dad's right. You probably just borrowed someone else's name. There's no way you're smart enough to pull this off." I met his eyes, calm as still water. "For years, you told me I'd amount to nothing, that I was wasting my life, and now that I've done what you couldn't, suddenly it's yours? You want to claim credit for the years I went hungry, for the nights I slept on the floor of my first cafe because I couldn't afford rent?" The room grew tense. Even my talkative aunt sat in silence, staring at the papers as though they were written in fire. My father's jaw tightened, and he pushed the documents back across the table, his hand shaking. "This doesn't mean anything," he barked. "You're still my son. Everything you own, it's part of this family. I decide how it's shared." Daniel leaned closer, his voice dripping with venom. "You're not fooling us. If you don't sign over a few shops, we'll tell everyone what really happened. We'll tell them you stole. We'll make sure no one respects you." Inside, I felt the familiar burn of humiliation threatening to consume me. Years ago, those words would have broken me. I would have begged for their approval, would have tried to explain myself, until my throat went raw. But tonight was different. I sat back, folded my hands on the table, and let silence stretch between us. I could feel their impatience, their confidence that I would cave. I didn't. "I see," I said finally, my voice steady. "You think this is your victory. You think you've cornered me." My father smirked, mistaking calm for surrender. "Exactly. So be smart. Do as I say. Sign a few papers, give us what we deserve, and we'll call it even. Otherwise..." He let the sentence trail off, heavy with unspoken threats. Daniel chuckled. "Don't make this hard, brother. We're family. Family shares." I rose from my chair, my movements slow, deliberate. My footsteps echoed as I crossed the room and disappeared into my study. They exchanged smug glances, certain I was fetching a checkbook. When I returned, I carried the wooden box in both hands. Its surface was scratched and worn, the brass hinges dulled with age. I placed it gently on the table between us. "What's this?" Daniel asked, suspicion flickering in his eyes. I didn't answer. Instead, I nodded toward the box. "Go ahead, open it." My father reached out, his fingers trembling slightly. He lifted the lid and froze. Inside, tucked neatly beside the contracts, was a sealed envelope. Yellowed with time, the edges frayed. The handwriting on the front was instantly recognizable. My mother's handwriting. His face drained of color. For years, no one had spoken of her letters. I had kept this one hidden, close to me, like a talisman. The lawyer, who had been quietly observing from the corner, cleared his throat. "Mr. Harris, this letter was entrusted to your son by your late wife. It was notarized. She wanted it opened only when the time was right." Daniel's smirk vanished completely. What letter?" he asked, his voice cracking. My father tore open the envelope with unsteady hands. His eyes darted across the page, the muscles in his jaw tightening with every line. His lips moved as he read silently, his breathing shallow. I watched him, my chest tight, my fingers curled against my palm. I already knew what the letter contained, but part of me dreaded hearing it aloud. That diary in my room had revealed fragments of the truth, but this was the final piece. Father slammed the letter onto the table, his voice trembling between rage and disbelief. You've been lying to us. You've been keeping secrets all this time. Have you been deceiving this whole family all these years?" His shout reverberated through the apartment, shattering the fragile silence. Daniel flinched, then looked at me as though seeing me for the first time. Micro cliffhanger. I didn't flinch. I simply pushed the letter back toward him and said, "Read it out loud, Dad. Let everyone hear what Mom wanted to say." My father's voice filled the apartment, echoing from the small speaker of my phone. It was a recording I had kept buried for years, a wound I never wanted to reopen. His words were jagged, sharp, and still carried the same venom they had the night he spat them at me. Get out of my house. I don't need a useless son like you." The air in the dining room froze. The laughter from earlier seemed like it had happened in another lifetime. My aunt stopped mid-sip, her glass trembling in her hand. My cousins stared at my father with wide eyes. Daniel's smirk melted into confusion, then fear. I pressed pause. "That was the night you threw me out, Dad," I said, my voice even, almost calm. "No money, no support. Just me, my bag, and the streets. You didn't believe in me then? You told me I'd never make it." My father's jaw clenched tighter. I was teaching you responsibility," he snapped, but his voice lacked conviction. I shook my head slowly. "You weren't teaching me anything. You were breaking me, and I survived, not because of you, but in spite of you." For a brief moment, I let the silence hang heavy. My chest ached, but I forced myself to breathe evenly. This was the rest I needed to remind myself that anger wouldn't serve me. My mother's words echoed in my head. "Don't let their cruelty define you. Rise, my son." I glanced at Daniel. He was gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "You can't prove anything," he muttered. "People will still believe us over you." Before I could respond, my lawyer, Mr. Clark, stepped forward. He placed another set of documents on the table, his tone calm but firm. "Actually, we can prove a lot. After your wife passed away, Mr. Harris, you and your younger son accessed her savings account. We have the bank records. Every dollar she left behind was withdrawn within a month. None of it went to my client." It was as though the walls themselves inhaled sharply. My father's face turned from red to pale. His eyes darted to Daniel, who looked down at the floor, tears already spilling down his cheeks. That's not what it looks like," my father stammered, his voice cracking. We needed that money. You wouldn't understand. You weren't here." I leaned forward, my voice low, almost a whisper. "I wasn't here because you pushed me out, and while you were taking what Mom left for all of us, I was sleeping on a cot in a rented storeroom, working double shifts just to survive." Daniel slammed his fist on the table. "You think you're better than us now, just because you got lucky with some coffee shops? You're still the same worthless brother who embarrassed us." I studied him, not with anger, but with a strange kind of sadness. He still didn't see it. He still thought I was competing with him. "Do you really believe luck built this?" I asked. "Do you think 21 stores appeared out of thin air because I was born into this family? No, I built them while you were sleeping on silk sheets and spending Mom's money." The words hit like stones, and I saw Daniel flinch as though struck. My father opened his mouth, then closed it again, his lips trembling. My lawyer cleared his throat once more. "And one more thing. The property you sold, Mr. Harris, the small lot near the old station, we have the deed. That land, which you dismissed as worthless, was purchased by my client years ago. It's now the location of his busiest cafe, generating more income than your entire business." My father's hand slipped from the table. Daniel's face turned scarlet, his tears now mixed with shame. The arrogance had drained from the room, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. I reached down and picked up the final envelope from the wooden box. It was thinner than the others, its flap sealed with a faded wax stamp. My mother's handwriting stretched across it, her letters delicate yet firm. "For my eldest son, when the time is right." I turned it over in my hands, feeling the weight of years and unspoken truths. My father's eyes narrowed, a spark of panic flickering in them. "What's in there?" he demanded, his voice hoarse. I placed it back on the table, sliding it toward him. My gaze didn't waver. "This," I said softly, "is the real reason I stayed silent all these years." The room collectively held its breath. My relatives leaned forward. Daniel wiped his face with the back of his hand. My father's fingers shook as he reached for the letter, tearing the fragile paper with a harsh rip that seemed to echo louder than his earlier laughter. Micro cliffhanger. His eyes darted across the first few lines. Then suddenly his face went blank, like all the color and pride had been drained from him in an instant. The room was silent, heavy with the weight of my mother's words. My father's lips moved, but no sound came out. His hands trembled as the letter fluttered in his grasp. Daniel's face was blotchy from crying, his bravado shattered. Inside that envelope was not just her will, it was her voice, her truth, her love for me, written in ink that had faded but never died. She had confessed that she knew how I was treated, how I was pushed away, and she wanted me to know that my worth was never measured by my father's approval. She wrote, "One day you will build something of your own, and when you do, remember, you don't owe anyone the pieces of yourself you fought for. You are free, my son. Live for you." I let him read it aloud, his voice cracking with each sentence, the words cutting deeper than any insult he had ever thrown at me. Every eye at the table was fixed on him, watching the proud patriarch crumble. For the first time, he had no weapon left, because the truth had betrayed him. He set the letter down with trembling hands. His voice broke into a snarl. You've been keeping this from us, from me? How dare you?" I met his fury with calm silence. Then I spoke, my words precise, deliberate, like the measured pour of hot water over coffee grounds. "You disowned me, remember? You told me I was worthless. And yet the woman you dismissed as weak believed in me. She trusted me with her last words. She gave me everything, not because of you, but because she saw who I could become." Daniel buried his face in his palms. "Dad, is this true? Did you really take Mom's savings? Did you? His voice cracked into a sob, torn between betrayal and denial. My father avoided his gaze. His silence was louder than any confession. The weight of it pressed on everyone. My aunts whispered, some shaking their heads, some looking away in shame. I tapped the final page of the contract. "And there's more. This," I said, sliding another document forward, "is my partnership with an international investment fund. Next year, my coffee shops will expand overseas. While you two were mocking me, I was already sealing deals that you could never imagine." Their faces drained of color. My father's hand twitched, as though he wanted to rip the papers apart, but didn't dare. Daniel's eyes widened, realizing the empire he mocked was real, untouchable, and far beyond his reach. I leaned back in my chair, clasping my hands together. "I don't need your money. I don't need your recognition. I built this life without you, and I'll continue without you if I must. But let me make one thing clear." I paused, letting my gaze cut through the silence. "I will never allow anyone, not even my own blood, to use me or take what I bled for. If you try, my lawyer will handle it." My father slammed his fist on the table, but the sound was hollow, weaker than before. His eyes darted, searching for support, but none came. Even the relatives who had laughed at me days ago sat frozen, their faces pale. The authority he once wielded had dissolved into smoke. Daniel's sobs grew louder. "I didn't know. I thought I thought you just got lucky." He wiped his face with his sleeve, his voice breaking apart. "I never thought Mom would. He couldn't finish. For a moment, I almost felt pity. Almost. I stood, picked up my coat, and walked toward the door. My chest ached, but not with anger anymore. It was something else, relief, release, a strange kind of peace. Behind me, I heard my father's voice, hoarse and broken. "Son, wait." I turned, my hand on the doorknob. The city lights poured in from the window, casting long shadows across the dining room. My father looked smaller than I had ever seen him, like a man suddenly aware of his own emptiness. "I don't need your approval anymore," I said quietly. "I don't need your money. If you want to be part of my life, it has to be real, not because of what I own, but because of who I am. If not—" I glanced at the lawyer's briefcase. "Then please leave my home." There was no shouting now, no laughter, only silence, thick and suffocating. My father's lips trembled as though he wanted to speak, but the words never came. Daniel just stared at the floor, broken, defeated. I opened the door. The cold winter air rushed in, carrying the faint sound of carolers from down the street. For a long, suspended second, I thought one of them might say something, apologize, beg, or even lash out again. But they didn't. They walked out without another word, swallowed by the night. The moment the door clicked shut, I felt the weight lift from my chest. I wasn't the boy they had thrown out anymore. I wasn't the shadow of someone else's favorite child. I was my own man. I slipped on my coat and headed out, walking through the quiet streets until I reached the first cafe I had ever opened. The little bell above the door chimed as I entered, the familiar scent of roasted beans and vanilla wrapped around me like a blanket. I sat by the window, watching people hurry by, scarves wrapped tight, cheeks pink from the cold. Laughter spilled from strangers walking hand in hand. For the first time in years, I felt a strange warmth. Not from anyone's approval, but from within myself. I pulled out my mother's diary again, flipping to the page I had read 100 times but never shared. Her handwriting seemed almost alive under the soft glow of the cafe lights. "My son, if you ever feel small, remember, you were born to rise. Don't live to prove them wrong. Live to prove yourself right. Live free." I closed the book and looked out at the city I had built my future in. My reflection in the glass stared back at me. Not the insecure boy my father had mocked, but the man my mother always knew I could become. Micro cliffhanger. As I sipped the first coffee of the night, my phone buzzed again. A message lit up the screen. "We're not done with you yet.